Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk about the path that law enforcement took that led them to arrest Bryan Kohberger almost 7 weeks after the Idaho 4 crimes occurred on November 13th of 2022. This is right out of the PCA. So this is what law enforcement claims happened and the steps that led them to Bryan Kohberger as a person of interest. Now, as we go along, I want to talk about some questions as well as some inconsistencies. But I want to begin with how Bryan Kohberger even ended up in Pullman, Washington in the first place. Now, we know that Bryan Kohberger graduated with his master's degree from DeSales University in Pennsylvania in June of 2022. So, this is only 5 months before the Idaho 4 crimes occurred. After graduating in June in Pennsylvania, he moves to Pullman, Washington. He's going to be studying his PhD at Washington State University, and he moves only a few months after he graduates in June of 2022 from DeSales University. Now, on August the 21st, so Bryan Kohberger has not been in town that long, but on August the 21st of 2022, Latah County Sheriff's Department pulls over Bryan Kohberger. And during the course of this traffic stop, this officer obtains Bryan Kohberger's telephone number. Why? Why would this officer want Bryan Kohberger's telephone number? I mean, I've never been asked for my telephone number during a traffic stop. And in my opinion, there's only really 2 reasons why someone in law enforcement would want your telephone number. And that would be to either call you or because they want to investigate you further. Something else that's really interesting is that they're not releasing the body cam footage from this traffic stop on August the 21st. Also, Bryan Kohberger's 2015 white Hyundai Elantra is reported to have Pennsylvania plates at the time that he's pulled over. So his registration was set to expire on November the 30th, but according to the PCA, he registered his car in Washington on November 18th of 2022. On October 14th, just 2 months after he was pulled over in August, Bryan Kohberger is pulled over again, this time by Washington State University police. Now, we do have body cam footage from this traffic stop, and he was pulled over for pulling out into the intersection to make a turn. So he seems very respectful in this interaction with this officer, and he had some questions for her because where he's from, apparently in Pennsylvania, you're allowed to pull out into the intersection and wait for traffic so that you can make your turn. Now, apparently that's not legal in Washington. Also, during this traffic stop, Bryan Kohberger's Hyundai still has his Pennsylvania tags. Now, just a month after he's pulled over by Washington State University police on November 13th of 2022, we know that the Idaho 4 crimes occurred. It was a very brutal crime, and the hunt is on by law enforcement to find whoever is responsible for these crimes. 12 days after the crimes occur on November the 25th of 2022, Moscow Police Department puts out a be on the lookout to other surrounding law enforcement agencies. And they're looking for a 2011 to 2013 white 4-door Hyundai Elantra. Now, this is a vehicle that investigators continue to see in security camera footage on the night of the crimes. So this vehicle is seen driving around the area at the time that law enforcement believes that these crimes occurred. So they're looking for this white Hyundai. 4 days later, on November 29th of 2022, a Washington State University officer is looking through the WSU database for this white Hyundai Elantra. Now, at 12:28 a.m., so just after midnight, and this is all in the PCA, this officer comes across a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra. It's registered in Pennsylvania, and it belongs to Bryan Kohberger. Now, this would have been after Bryan Kohberger registered his car in Washington, but it would make sense that when this WSU officer came across his car in the database, that it still said that it was registered in Pennsylvania, because likely when they entered the information into this database, it would have been around July. So Bryan's car would have still had Pennsylvania tags. Now, on the very same day, not only the very same day, but exactly 30 minutes later at 12:58 a.m., another Washington State University officer is out on patrol, and he's looking for this white Hyundai Elantra. Now, he comes across a 2015 white four-door Hyundai Elantra at an apartment complex, and this vehicle also belongs to Bryan Kohberger. So these two separate Washington State University officers both found Bryan Kohberger's 2015 white Hyundai Elantra within exactly 30 minutes of each other. So as you read the PCA, it reads as though these two officers were acting separately of one another. That the first one just found it in the database, and the second one just happened to be cruising around 30 minutes later and found the same car. So I felt like that was kind of odd, because I feel like there's probably a lot of white Hyundai Elantras in this area. I can't imagine that they just both narrowed it down to this one white Hyundai Elantra. It just seems odd, or at the very least, a pretty strange coincidence. So when this second WSU officer comes across this white Hyundai Elantra, he runs the tags, and that's how he gets Bryan Kohberger's name. Now, he also looks at Bryan Kohberger's license in the system, and it's listed that this individual is 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, and this officer feels as though he does have bushy eyebrows. So this is when this officer determines that this individual does match the description that was given to law enforcement by Dylan Mortensen. This is November 29th of 2022, and this is when Bryan Kohberger becomes a person of interest, and this is when law enforcement begins investigating him. Now, as they're conducting their investigation, they realize that he was pulled over on August 21st. And as they're watching that body cam footage that we can't watch, but as they're watching that body cam footage, they realize that Bryan Kohberger gives this officer his telephone number. So what they do is they conduct an electronic database inquiry. And from this, they determine that Bryan Kohberger's cell phone is serviced by AT&T. So they're investigating him at this point on November the 29th. This is 2 weeks after the crimes occur. So they're already looking into his cellular phone information. Now, on December 7th, a week after these two Washington State University officers find Bryan Kohberger's car, Moscow Police Department puts out a be on the lookout, and this time it goes out to the public. They're basically asking for the public's help in locating a 2011 to 2013 white four-door Hyundai Elantra. Now, they know that Bryan Kohberger's car is a 2015, and they're already investigating him. But they still put out these years, 2011 to 2013. So it seems strange that they would put this information out there about this 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra when they have a person of interest who they know is driving a 2015 Hyundai Elantra. Something else that seems really strange, and I've talked to a lot of people about this very thing. I've talked to a lot of people in law enforcement and in other professions, and I've asked them, why didn't they bring Bryan Kohberger in for questioning? That's a question that a lot of people can't answer because it seems as though once Bryan Kohberger was a person of interest, that they would bring him in and question him, possibly ask him for some DNA, maybe take DNA from his vehicle that they found outside of his apartment. But why wouldn't they question him? And a lot of people have said that, they didn't want him to know that they were onto him. They didn't want him to know that he was even a suspect or even a person of interest. But that just really doesn't make sense to me. I mean, obviously, someone who can commit a quadruple homicide and take 4 people's lives with a knife is a very dangerous person. So it seems odd that if you have a person of interest in this situation, that you would just let him continue to roam around the streets. Not only that, but this is allowing him more time to possibly hide evidence, possibly clean out his vehicle. It doesn't make sense that as soon as he became a person of interest, that they didn't want to talk to him. They didn't want to look at his car. So I've just thought that was kind of odd that they never questioned Bryan Kohberger while he was right there in Pullman, Washington. I mean, Bryan Kohberger may have just given them DNA. They may have been able to pull DNA off of his vehicle that they found in his apartment complex. So, I mean, it's possible that they could have saved a lot of time and not had to follow Bryan Kohberger 2,500 miles. They may have been able just to get the DNA right there. I mean, it didn't really seem like he was hiding. He stuck around and finished out the semester. So it just doesn't make sense to me that they didn't pull him in and question him. Now, on December 12th of 2022, Bryan Kohberger and his father set off on a cross-country road trip in his white Hyundai Elantra. They're going from Pullman, Washington to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, where Bryan Kohberger's parents live. And they're going out there for the Christmas holiday. Bryan Kohberger is not a fugitive from justice at this point. He's just going home for the holiday. So him and his dad set off on this trip. So now you have a person of interest in a quadruple homicide who is now leaving the state and going cross country, if that makes any sense at all whatsoever. On October 15th, as Bryan and his dad are driving to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, they get pulled over 2 times in a period of 10 minutes in Indiana. They get pulled over for following too closely. Now, originally, investigators came out and they said, this is purely coincidental. We were not following Bryan Kohberger, which I do not believe for 1 second. I do believe that they were following Bryan Kohberger from Pullman, Washington, all the way to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Both times, Bryan Kohberger was let off with a warning. No citations. Now, on December 16th, Bryan Kohberger reaches Pennsylvania, and he takes his car in that day, his white Hyundai, in for service. And so this is where he's picked up on camera in Pennsylvania. Now, the New York Times reported that law enforcement had Bryan Kohberger's name on December 19th. The Idaho Statesman reported that on December 23rd, investigators obtained search warrants for Bryan Kohberger's cell phone. Now, this seems strange because they were already investigating him on November the 29th. So they had his name on November the 29th. Not only his name, they had all of his information as well. And they had already been looking into his cellular phone information because that's how they discovered that his service provider was AT&T. So they had Bryan Kohberger's name 3 weeks before December 19th. it wouldn't make sense that they just got Bryan Kohberger's cellular phone information on the 23rd, and then they were able to construct a map and everything from cell phone towers and everything else in just a matter of less than a week. So they already had Bryan Kohberger's cell phone information, in my opinion. But apparently, they're going to go with December 19th, and they obtained the cell phone warrants on December 23rd. Now, after they get this information, according to law enforcement, they began surveilling Bryan Kohberger at his parents' house in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. And during this time, they dig a piece of garbage out of the Kohberger trash that's out on the curb. And they send this trash out to be processed for DNA. And in 48 hours, they have a determination that some of this trash has the DNA of Bryan Kohberger's dad on it. So it took them almost 6 weeks to try to process Bryan Kohberger's IgG, but they were able to spin around his dad's DNA in 48 hours. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. Now, after they received the results of the garbage that had Bryan Kohberger's dad's DNA on it, the FBI calls in a tip to investigators, letting them know that they have a match, that Bryan Kohberger's dad's DNA matches the DNA that was found on the knife sheath at the crime scene. And in the early morning hours of December 30th, law enforcement storms Bryan Kohberger's parents' house as if they are raiding El Chapo, and basically knocks down doors, breaks windows, the whole gamut. But Bryan Kohberger is taken into custody in the early morning hours of December 30th, 2022, almost 7 weeks after the Idaho 4 crimes occurred, and almost 5 weeks after they already had found his vehicle and had all of his information back in Pullman, Washington. So this is how everyone ended up in Pennsylvania, which seems strange because it seems as though they could have taken care of all of this in Pullman, Washington. I mean, they basically followed Bryan Kohberger across country to get a piece of garbage. Like, that just doesn't make sense. If they needed more DNA from Bryan Kohberger, it seems as though they could have either maybe just asked him for it when they brought him in for questioning, if they would have done that. They could have maybe pulled it off of his car or gotten it from his office at Washington State University. It just seems odd that they had to drive across country. Now, a lot of people have said that they don't think that law enforcement had enough to arrest Bryan Kohberger before he left for his trip to Pennsylvania. But he didn't leave until December 12th, a month after the crimes occurred. So it's kind of hard for me to believe that they couldn't get something on Bryan Kohberger in a month. I mean, they were onto him on November the 29th. So it's a very strange path that they took to get to Bryan Kohberger. You know, basically, they had to arrest him 2,500 miles away from where the crime occurred because they needed a piece of garbage. It's odd that when Bryan Kohberger became a person of interest on November the 29th, only 2 weeks after the crimes occurred, that law enforcement did not bring him in to question him, to talk to him about it. I mean, instead they just allowed him to roam around. You know, they believe that this person could possibly be a very, very dangerous individual, but yet they just let him cruise around freely. So that seems strange to me. I can understand why Ann Taylor is asking for clarification as to how did investigators how did investigators zero in on her client, Bryan Kohberger? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. So tell me what you think. Do you think that they really needed to follow Bryan Kohberger across country, or was there another reason for why they did that? You know, it just doesn't make sense. The path they took definitely seems like the long way around. They had him right there in Pullman, Washington. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I hope that y'all had an amazing day. We'll see you next time.